Laurel stood in the bustling lobby of Ashwood Corporate Towers, her coffee trembling slightly in hand. It was a busy Monday morning, and the polished marble floors gleamed under the bright lights. Employees rushed past, clutching their briefcases and chatting about meetings they clearly weren't ready for. But Laurel wasn't thinking about presentations. No, she was fixated on one person, the janitor. His name was Miguel, a kind man in his late 50s. Each morning he arrived with a welcoming smile, his worn blue uniform a testament to long hours and hard work. But today that smile was strained. A large spill of coffee, dark and unforgiving, spread across the once pristine floor, and Laurel watched as Miguel struggled with the mop, his brows furrowing in frustration. Laurel had witnessed the way people treated him, like he was invisible, faded into the background while the suits glided past him, oblivious to his presence. That made her heart ache. As she watched him toil, something inside her stirred. Was it injustice or sympathy? Perhaps both. She took a deep breath, feeling the heat of her coffee rising. The urge to say something, to advocate for him, bubbled to the surface. But maybe it was the pressure of the morning's meetings lurking in her mind. Maybe it was frustration boiling over. She didn't know, but she felt the words leap to her lips. She marched over to where Miguel stood, the mop making little progress against the expansive mess. She shouted, her voice cutting through the cacophony of the lobby. The sudden tension in the air silenced conversation and quickened heartbeats. Miguel froze, eyes wide, mop paused mid-swipe. His face paled slightly, confusion dancing across his features. Laurel continued, fueled by frustration. This should be done already. The hallway fell silent, all eyes drawn to the scene unfolding before them. Even the tallest office workers, usually wrapped in their own concerns, stepped back, eager to witness this unfolding drama. It was surreal and in its own way a little bit foolish. Yet Laurel felt empowered. She briefly relished the spotlight. Miguel's eyes dropped to the floor, the coffee stains stark against the marble. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered, voice so soft it was nearly lost amidst the tense air. But Laurel couldn't hear the apology. All she could feel was the fire within her. "Your best isn't good enough," she snapped. The words echoed in the lobby like thunder. People's breaths caught, eyes darting from Miguel to her, waiting for a resolution that felt inevitable, either a fight or a breakdown. Suddenly, a murmured conversation broke the tension, filtering through the crowd. One voice whispered while another scoffed. As more murmurs floated around, a growing knot formed in Laurel's stomach. Was that what they saw? Was she really making things worse? Would they discount Miguel's labor and prop her up as the villain? That thought hit like an unexpected punch. Just then, a figure materialized from the crowd. It was Mr. Collins, the head of security, a tall man with a commanding presence, known for his sharp suit and even sharper demeanor. He stood before Laurel, a concerned look on his face as he glanced between her and Miguel. His voice was calm yet firm, the kind used to diffuse tension with authority. Laurel attempted to hold her ground, but the confidence crumbled as she met Mr. Collins' steely gaze. "He's taking too long," she replied, trying to sound more composed than she felt. In that moment, something changed in the air, something that felt like a silent understanding passing between Miguel and Mr. Collins. Without a word, Miguel nodded, his mop swishing towards the spill, determination overtaking the uncertainty in his expression. Then, in a surprising move, Mr. Collins stepped back slightly. "With all due respect, Ms. Laurel, I think Miguel handles the building's cleanliness, which allows you to focus on the division." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Surely he understood her frustration. Maybe Miguel was moving slowly, but hadn't she added to his burden by making a scene? Just then, a woman from the crowd lingered forward. "I often see him working late to ensure everything is perfect for us," she offered softly, her tone almost apologetic. The room was alive now. Witnesses weren't just onlookers, they were part of a shifting tide. Each comment was like a wave, pushing against Laurel, softening her stance as the reality of her actions sank in. "Yeah, everyone has moments where they struggle," another voice chimed in. She felt heat crawl up her cheeks. Moments swirled in her mind, flashes of days where she'd been caught off guard, days when she too had needed support. Hadn't they all? Somewhere in her drive to succeed, had she lost sight of human kindness? Miguel straightened up, considering Laurel with a mix of disappointment and hope, and his next words were steady. "I appreciate you wanting the best for the office." His voice, once small, now resonated with a hint of strength. Laurel sensed the shift. The warmth of realization brushed against her skin, forcing her to self-reflect. She took a step closer to Miguel. "I shouldn't have shouted, I'm sorry for that." The crowd exhaled a collective sigh, the tension breaking like a fragile bubble. Laurel could feel the pulse of shifting energy. Mercy, support, and understanding flooded the space, washing away her earlier anger. Mr. Collins gave a subtle nod to Miguel, the clear signal of recognition. "Miguel keeps this building running smoothly." His words hung in the air, a reminder that even in the hustle, humanity never fades. A few employees clapped, some cheered. Others stepped forward to offer their support, words of encouragement buoying Miguel's spirit. For a moment, they shifted the narrative, turning the lobby into a sanctuary of solidarity. Laurel felt the weight lift, the realization dawning like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I had no idea how much this you do matters," she continued, earnestness spilling from her. Miguel's face lit up not because of her words, but because the enormity of the moment broke the invisible barriers cast over him. "I just do my job," he said, gratitude mingling with humility. "But it's not just a job, Miguel," Laurel replied. "You keep our workplace welcoming." His small smile widened, the warmth returning to his eyes as the crowd began to join in the conversation. Employees shared their own experiences, acknowledging the efforts of everyone who kept the office running smoothly, from receptionists to service staff. As the atmosphere shifted, Miguel became the center of attention, yet he remained humble, acknowledging each compliment with a nod and a gentle smile. It felt like healing had occurred in that lobby, an understanding born out of a momentary misunderstanding. They shared laughter, stories, and apologies, a community forged through connection. And Laurel felt lighter. Suddenly, tensions melted away as understanding filled the space where silence held sway just moments before. Just before Miguel returned to cleaning, he glanced at Laurel, the spark of understanding in his eyes. "Thank you for seeing me today," he said softly. "Thank you for your work and for your patience," she replied, a genuine warmth radiating between them. That day, Laurel learned about the weight of words, the power they could hold. As she walked away, she realized that sometimes all it takes is one voice to start the wave of change. One shout turned into recognition, and recognition into respect. And beyond the polished floors of Ashwood Corporate Towers, something had transformed, a collective spirit invigorated by balance, compassion, and understanding. In a world where it was easy to forget, they remembered that every person mattered, that everyone, no matter their role, deserved dignity. As people drifted back to their routines, back to meetings and calls, Laurel took one last look around the lobby, her heart swelling with hope. Perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter, a story where respect reigned, driven by a simple interaction that allowed them all to shine a little brighter. At the center of it all, a woman in a sharp business suit stood, her expression locked in a tense mask of impatience. Just behind her, the janitor, a quiet man named Rafael, diligently pushed his mop across a fresh spill. An unsightly blotch of dark coffee sprawled across the shining floor. "There's a client meeting in 10 minutes, she snapped, voice ringing out like a gunshot in the bustling room. The air thickened, people paused in their tracks, a collective gasp rising as the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Rafael looked up, surprise etched across his face. He was used to being unseen, his every day spent wiping away the remnants of others' chaotic routines. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. But those words did little to soften her stance. It was as if she hadn't even heard him, the steam of relentless ambition clouding her judgment. "Your best isn't good enough," she hurled, and her anger resonated, holding the attention of everyone around. Murmurs swirled through the crowd. Faces turned, their expressions a mix of surprise, discomfort, and disbelief. The janitor Rafael had been an ever-present figure in their world, a quiet sentinel ensuring their environment remained pristine, yet here was his very existence being questioned. She stood firm, glancing at her watch as if it would somehow validate her impatience. The tension felt tangible, thickening the space around them, yet Rafael merely lowered his gaze, shame pulling at the corners of his mouth. Suddenly, from around the corner came a familiar voice booming, rich with authority, the Chief of Security, Officer Daniels. He strode towards them, his uniform crisp and badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. He demanded, his presence commanding a different kind of respect. She spat, unable to hide the irritation in her voice. Daniels glanced at Rafael, his expression shifting from confusion to something deeper. "Is that so?" He turned to her, authority emanating from every word. "You might want to consider how you speak to him." Indignation flashed across her face. "He's just a janitor." Rafael took a small step back, the stigma of his position like a weight pressing down on him. He'd heard this tone many times from others, dismissive, degrading, carrying the bitter taste of contempt, but this time felt different. The room was filled with witnesses, the crowd behind him slowly beginning to shift, some nodding in quiet agreement with Officer Daniels. "Being just a janitor means cleaning up after all of you," Officer Daniels countered, gesturing at the bustling crowd. "It means creating a comfortable space where you can conduct business." The tension balanced precariously in the air, and for a brief moment, silence reigned. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see how the scene would unfold. Laurel, the woman in the sharp suit, felt the heat of shame creeping up her neck. Her bravado faltered, a wave of realization washing over her as the words echoed in her mind. As people began to nod in agreement, a murmur of support for Rafael began to ripple through the crowd, something she hadn't anticipated. "He's right, working behind the scenes doesn't make him less important," someone called out from the side. Feeling cornered, Laurel's defenses flared again, but the courage that had fueled her initial outburst felt like it was evaporating. She stumbled. The tension shifted again, but this time, it was wrapped in something softer. "You're under a lot of pressure, I get that," Officer Daniels said. Rafael stood still, absorbing the exchange that played out before him. He felt an odd sense of strength building within. Perhaps others really did see him, not just as an invisible cog in their machine, but as a person worthy of respect. Their support buoyed him, lifting the weight of dismissal he felt daily. Laurel finally looked at Raphael, really looked at him. The way his hands shook slightly as he held the mop, his deep brown eyes reflecting a mix of disappointment and silent endurance. Suddenly, it was as if the scales had fallen from her eyes and her heart twisted with regret. She began, her voice wavering. "I'm sorry for how I spoke to you, Raphael. I didn't think." The words hung in the air, a mixture of tension and reluctant understanding. Officer Daniels, arms crossed, gave a subtle nod, perhaps surprised by her admission. The crowd stirred, some exchanging glances, others offering rasped sounds of agreement. Raphael met her gaze, a flicker of cautious hope in his eyes. "It's okay," he said slowly. "I know my job isn't glamorous, but I'm proud of what I do." In that crowded lobby, an invisible bridge began to form between them, spanning the years filled with silent misunderstandings and unspoken respect. Her expression softened, the fierceness fading, replaced by connection, pure human connection. "Thank you for that," Laurel said genuinely. "I wish I had recognized sooner." Raphael smiled, a hesitant yet radiant expression breaking across his face. He had chosen to stand tall instead of shying away, and for the first time something about this moment felt transformative. And then it happened. Someone else from the crowd stepped forward, a young woman in a colorful dress. "We should all be grateful," she said boldly. A ripple of agreement swept through the onlookers. "Yes. Let's all pitch in," another voice chimed in. With that, the lobby transformed from a battleground of judgment into a party of gratitude. People began to gather around Raphael, clapping him on the back, enthusiastic voices promising to treat him to coffee or a meal. Some even offered small gift streets, a little card of appreciation. As the energy shifted, Laurel felt an overwhelming wave of emotion rush through her. She watched as Raphael absorbed the love and support he never expected, shaking his head in disbelief yet allowing himself a moment to savor it. In the midst of it all, Officer Daniels smiled knowingly. He had witnessed countless moments of conflict turn into harmony. "Moments like this remind us all to treat one another with kindness, no matter where we are in life," he said, his voice strong but gentle. Laurel, now part of this transformative moment, turned to face the crowd, her heart racing with gratitude. We should all remember that no one is lesser than anyone else. The atmosphere of camaraderie grew thick, laughter and friendly banter occupying the spaces that had been filled with tension just moments before. Raphael stood in the center, head held high, beaming with pride and his heart swelling. As people began to disperse, offering Raphael their words of encouragement, he felt the shift not just within himself but in the company culture around him. This was more than just a moment. It was the beginning of something new, a shift that reminded everyone how simple gestures of respect could open doors to understanding. Laurel hung back, leaning against the polished marble wall, watching as Raphael basked in the affection of his colleagues. She felt a strange, powerful kinship forming. Maybe this experience could redefine her own perspective. As she walked away from that day in the lobby, her thoughts whirled. She had come to demand perfection in a world that so often overlooked the silent heroes who ensured the wheels turned smoothly. She could be a leader who uplifted her entire team, acknowledging their contributions, no matter how small they seemed. Moments later, she paused, turning back toward Raphael and the remaining crowd. He looked up, catching her eye, and they shared a small smile filled with understanding, two souls who had crossed paths in a way that transformed them both. And that shift changed the rhythm of the Ashwood Corporate Towers, echoing through hallways and offices long after the day was done. From that moment forward, each person who entered those doors carried a small spark of recognition, a reminder of that remarkable morning when they chose to let kindness rise above ambition and respect outshine the pressures of their roles. All it took was one bold shout to turn the tide, reminding them that in a busy world, true greatness became an act of unwavering respect. The lobby of Crestview Tower erupted in chaos as a spilling mug of coffee traced a dark line across the pristine marble floor. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, bustling with the sound of heels clicking against the polished surface, and yet everything seemed to freeze in that moment. No one moved. All eyes shifted toward the janitor, a man in his late 50s named Ben, who was kneeling down, mop in hand, just moments away from cleaning the mess. A voice cut through the stillness, sharp and jagged. It belonged to Lily, the ambitious marketing director known for her ruthless efficiency. She stood in the middle of the lobby, perfectly polished nails tapping against her hard clipboard, her eyes burning with impatience. "We have a presentation in 10 minutes. The tension thickened, a tightrope stretched between her booming anger and Ben's quiet dignity. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face like the reflections in the marble. Quietly, he continued mopping, determination etched into his brow. The coffee seeped further into the cracks of the floor, a stark contrast to Lily's bright blazer and high-stakes urgency. People began to whisper, their gazes flicking between Lily and the struggling janitor. Why is he taking so long? Lily pressed, her tone rising. Eyes widened as the tension hung heavy, electrifying the air. "I'm doing my best, ma'am," Ben said softly, his voice laboring under the weight of her disdain. his response caught in the throats of onlookers. Could it be that this steadfast janitor, who had quietly maintained their corporate kingdom day in and day out, was now the subject of her scorn? The moment grew thick with discomfort. The air crackled with a female voice roaring from a place of privilege, ready to crush the man who simply devoted his life to cleaning. Lily, however, saw only the mess. In her world of deadlines and power suits, everyone existed to meet her demands. But in her battle for supremacy, she had overlooked the humanity standing before her. There was no room for compassion in her ambition, and that thought sunk like stone in the hearts of those who watched. Then the door swung open, and in strode Officer Jenkins, the head of security, his uniform sharp and his presence commanding. He took one look at the scene unfolding and shot a look between Lily and Ben. He asked, voice heavy like a low drum. Lily exclaimed, an edge to her voice, "This is unacceptable behavior." Jenkins turned his attention to Ben. His tone softened, making room for defense. "No, sir," Ben replied, his brow creased as he continued to mop. Jenkins' eyes narrowed at Lily. Ben has been doing this job for years. Lily's anger amplified, but he's not doing it fast enough. Being kind is part of business, Jenkins fired back. Every person here plays a role. In that instant, something fractured within Lily. She felt the weight of judgment colliding with her ambition, her towering confidence cracking under the scrutiny of people who typically avoided her gaze. She glanced at the crowd, their expressions revealing the unease they all felt. She was used to leading through fear, but now she faced a wave of emotion, a collective spirit rising in support of Ben Rothbell. A younger employee who had quietly observed the scene gathered his courage. "You know, Ben always stays late to make sure everything is perfect when we come in the morning." The waves of support began to swell, voices rising in agreement. "Yeah, he really does work hard," added another voice, a woman who usually kept her head down. For the first time that morning, an unfamiliar sensation wrapped around Lily's embarrassment. She struggled to hold her ground as the spotlight shifted, and Ben stood strong, lifting his mop one more time with renewed purpose. Yet Lily felt the walls closing in, her previous confidence slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. The reality in that moment was painfully clear. She had acted thoughtlessly, and now it weighed upon her like a suffocating blanket. Jenkins stepped closer to Ben, acknowledging the quiet strength the janitor had shown throughout the conflict. "You keep this place running smoothly." Ben met Jenkins' gaze, a glimmer of acknowledgement shining through. The weight that had burdened him, that feeling of being invisible, began to lift bit by bit as people rallied around him. What was once a painful silence transformed into an empowering soundscape of voices speaking out, cheering for Ben. Lily, standing amidst the force of a tide she had not anticipated, felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "I am sorry, Ben." Her words came out stammered but sincere, each syllable filled with the weight of self-awareness. Even in her apology, she held her ground, but Ben, in his quiet dignity, offered a shrug. The response rolled through the crowd. They nodded in agreement, feeling the pulse of his words resonate. Here was a man who worked tirelessly, yet remained unseen until this moment. Lily took a deep breath, the tension dissipating, replaced with an unexpected vulnerability. "I should have recognized your hard work, Ben." A moment of silence enveloped the room, almost tangible, as if the echoes of her words formed a bridge between them. Ben's eyes softened, a hint of appreciation evident in his expression. "It's okay." The air shifted once more, and Lily could feel humanity's warmth wrapping around her, the connection forged between them pulling them closer. She began to see the bigger picture. Business wasn't just about deadlines and presentation. It was about respect, compassion, and the unseen faces that made everything work. "Maybe we should take a minute to thank our maintenance staff more often," someone suggested from the back of the group. Suddenly, laughter broke through the atmosphere, easing the palpable tension. Together, the employees of Crestview Tower began to acknowledge Ben's contribution. They shared stories, flung compliments, and lifted the barrier between executive and janitor, creating a warmth that felt like family in those cold marble halls. Jenkins, still watching closely, couldn't help but smile at this transformation. It was not just Lily's change of heart, but a unity forming within the workplace that could ripple outward. He felt a renewed hope in the air, empowered by their courage to lift each other up. As people began to disperse into small groups, some still lingering around Ben, Lily stepped closer. She asked, her tone earnest. He paused, looking into her eyes and seeing the sincerity there, the willingness to change. "That would be nice," he replied, a soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Awesome, it's on me," she declared, lifting her chin with newfound confidence like a phoenix rising. The crowd erupted in laughter as she gestured dramatically, turning their earlier confrontation into a shared moment of realization and growth. And Ben took a breath, feeling lighter than he had in years. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, not just as the man who cleaned up, but as a valued member of the team. He could feel that shift, which transformed both the way Lily perceived him and how he saw himself. In the weeks that followed, the culture within Crestview Tower began to evolve. Employees initiated meetings to share positive acknowledgments. Every week, they highlighted the hard work of different teams, from the receptionists who greeted clients to the custodial staff keeping the offices clean. The once constant dismissive attitude shifted into recognition and gratitude, and Lily, she thrived in her role but not at the expense of others. She became known for her warmth, actively engaging everyone, forging connections that merged ambition with respect. She often bent down to chat with Ben whenever they crossed paths, and her genuine interest created a bond that resonated throughout the building. Ben felt a gentle swell of pride in his role. He thrived in the appreciation, not just from Lily but from the entire team. That change became contagious, rippling out as employees began to speak with kindness, warmth, and genuine respect for one another. Then on a bright morning 6 months later, as sunlight streamed through the expansive windows of Crestview Tower, they hosted a charity fundraiser in the lobby, an event designed to promote community and collaboration. As the crowd buzzed with anticipation, a familiar face stepped up to a podium positioned right where Lily had first confronted Ben in that fateful moment. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice warm and inviting. With that, she turned toward Ben, standing just off to the side, her eyes gleaming with sincerity. The applause erupted as he walked forward, a look of surprise and humility on his face. The appreciation and recognition felt intoxicating, flooding through him. He took a deep breath, looking out at the crowd of faces beaming with gratitude, and realized in those moments that he too had transformed that day. As he accepted the small token of appreciation, a beautiful crystal award, he felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Shuffling through the applause, buoyed by the cheers, he gathered himself before speaking. "Thank you, everyone. It's more than just a job for me. I'm proud to be part of this team." The applause grew fervent, and in that moment, everyone realized they had forged something deeper than just a work environment. It was a family bound together by respect and kindness, rooted in the shared belief that every role, no matter how small, mattered deeply in the grand tapestry of life. So it began, a turning point for Crestview Tower. This was now a company where every individual stood tall and every voice mattered. Where once ambition had been a weapon, it now morphed into a unifying force, all sparked by a single moment, a cry for respect, a chance for connection, and the reminder that sometimes a janitor holds more power than we think. The lobby of Maplewood Plaza was a battlefield of ambition that morning. As the golden sunlight streamed through the massive glass doors, a woman stomped in, her heels clicking with urgency against the polished marble. Her name was Sarah, the head of marketing, known for her relentless pursuit of perfection. But on this Tuesday, her focus was singular: the spill. A fresh stain of coffee sprawled across the floor like an unwelcome shadow. It crept across the polished tiles, a stark reminder of someone's busy morning. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she turned her gaze to the janitor, an older man named Joe, who was diligently preparing to mop up the mess. Sarah shouted, her voice slicing through the morning buzz of chatter. It was a moment that froze the crowd. Heads turned, the air thickening with disbelief and tension. Joe looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "I'm just getting the supplies," he replied, his voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing around him. "Supplies? You've had enough time." Sarah's impatience echoed through the spacious lobby. The words felt sharp, piercing the atmosphere like a dagger. Employees exchanged glances, a mix of discomfort and outrage swirling in their expressions. Joe had been working at Maplewood for 10 years, an unseen hero sweeping away the remnants of others' chaos, yet today he stood under a torrent of hostility. "I'm trying my best," he said quietly, his voice showing weariness. "That's not good enough," Sarah snapped, crossing her arms, posture rigid with indignation. She didn't notice the eyes widening around them, the whispers growing louder. "Hey Sarah, come on," a voice called, breaking through the tension. It was Tom, one of the young interns, his face showing a mix of sympathy and disbelief. But Sarah didn't relent. "It shouldn't be taking this long." Joe held his ground. "I've been here a long time." His words were firm, but tinged with a humility that revealed the depth of his experience. Laughter rippled through the crowd, a nervous reaction to the disarray unfolding before them. Sarah's frustration bubbled to the surface, the heat in her cheeks rising. She couldn't let anyone think this was acceptable. The stakes were high, her reputation on the line. How could they understand? But something else stirred in the room. Muffled conversations began to arise behind her, chatter of support for Joe, a wave building against her structured world. Someone shouted from the back. That was when Officer Reynolds, the head of security, strode in from the side entrance. His presence demanded respect, a broad-shouldered man in crisp uniform with an aura of authority that filled the room. He scanned the crowd, spotting the commotion unfolding. He asked, his tone steady but concerned. Sarah's voice pitched higher than she intended, awkwardly forced. Reynolds focused his gaze on Joe, who was still trying to mop up the stubborn coffee stain. He asked, using the janitor's name, acknowledging him as more than just a functionary in the background. "It's Joe, sir," he corrected gently, not biting back but simply stating the truth. "Right," Reynolds nodded, turning back to Sarah. Sarah gestured wildly, breath quickening with the palpable stress of the situation. The tension crackled in the air as if the very walls of Maplewood could hear their arguments. Ben stood still, mop poised in his hands, absorbing the waves of confrontation with quiet fortitude. Would it always be this way, he wondered? Was he condemned to exist in the shadows forever? Reynolds stepped closer, an unwavering figure of authority. Just a spill, everyone makes mistakes. With every word, Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her. She shot back, the words spiraling from a place of desperation instead of genuine concern. Reynolds took a deep breath, and in that moment, he became more than just a security officer. An image isn't built on perfection, it's built on respect. Look around you. The people here are more than their titles. Joe puts in long hours to make sure we have a clean place to work. A hush fell over the crowd as they processed his words, the energy shifting palpably among them. Sarah's bravado began to wane, a tiny flicker of realization cutting through her fog of certainty. She glanced at Joe, seeing him for the first time, not just as an employee, but as a person standing before her, vulnerable yet resilient. Joe, she began, but the words faltered on her tongue. What was she supposed to say? The realization that she had belittled him sat heavy in her gut, and she felt a tinge of shame color her cheeks. Apologies don't mean much if we keep repeating behavior, Joe said quietly, the strength of his tone unwavering. Around them, murmurs of agreement spread. Yeah, Sarah, he deserves better than that, someone called from the back. The tide turned completely, and Sarah felt the weight of their collective gaze. They were uniting behind Joe, and for the first time in her life, she found herself questioning her place in this world, the armor of ambition cracking and revealing her insecurities beneath. Reynolds took it a step further. This is why I commend Joe every day. Swallowing hard, Sarah felt her facade crumble. The way everyone looked at Joe now painted a new picture. He was no longer invisible, but a man who mattered just as much as any corporate executive. Taking a deep breath, she summoned the courage to go further. I truly apologize for how I spoke to you, Joe. That was uncalled for. Instead of brushing it off, Joe met her gaze squarely. Thank you. We all have our roles, but it's important we see each other in those roles. The room breathed together. It wasn't just a moment, it became a catalyst for change. Sarah felt the kindness wrap around her like a warm blanket, one she had long forgotten about in her relentless pursuit of success. The cycle of ambition had dulled her sense of empathy, and now it flooded back in waves, reshaping her understanding of leadership. With that, a ripple of applause began, hesitant at first, blossoming into a full display of appreciation for Joe. Nods of respect and gratitude flooded the room as employees began to cheer him on. He smiled shyly, humility radiating from his every pore. Let's make this a new habit, Reynolds suggested as he nodded at Joe. The energy shifted to hope as everyone nodded in agreement. Sarah closed her eyes momentarily, feeling grateful that the day had taken such an unexpected turn. They could create a culture here, not just among executives, but for every person who walked through the doors of Maplewood Plaza. Over the next few weeks, the changes became evident. Signs of appreciation began to pop up, simple notes of gratitude shared openly, formal meetings acknowledging the work done behind the scenes. The flickering warmth of community grew stronger, and every employee, from the executives to Joe the janitor, felt engaged in a shared purpose. Sarah's life transformed, too. She found herself engaging more deeply, seeing individuals rather than titles. The once competitive nature waned, melting into a camaraderie that enriched their work environment. The empowerment of acknowledging one another created an atmosphere where everyone could thrive. When Joe shared stories of his life, they listened, the words carrying weight and meaning. He stood tall now, his role recognized and honored. He became the heart of Maplewood, not just a forgotten figure in the background. For Sarah, it was a lesson that reverberated far beyond the walls of the plaza. The day she shouted at the janitor became the catalyst to change her approach, giving her a fresh perspective on success, not as a solitary journey, but one deeply rooted in connection and respect. One afternoon, as they wrapped up a quarterly meeting centered around the triumphs and challenges, Sarah spotted Joe in the lobby. She approached him, a smile on her face. I wanted to invite you to our next team meeting. Joe's expression glowed with surprise, and he looked down for a moment as if he couldn't quite believe it. Absolutely, she affirmed. Your work matters. As they stood there, sharing a moment of connection amidst the bustling crowd, Sarah felt the bond they had cultivated, a genuine respect forged in that initial confrontation. The previous tension and anger morphed into a foundation for understanding. In that lobby where ambition had once clashed harshly, there now reigned a spirit of unity, connection, and benevolence. It all began with one loud shout, a powerful reminder that every voice matters, every role is significant, and in the end, it's respect that builds a true community on the foundations of a business. And as they continued their journey, Sarah understood that leadership isn't about control. Rather, it lies in uplifting others, cultivating kindness, and creating a workplace where every individual knows their worth. It was a lesson etched into their days and woven into the very fabric of Maplewood Plaza, a legacy far more enduring than any corporate success measure ever could be. In the middle of a bustling Monday morning, a a single cup of coffee tipped over in the sprawling lobby of Lakeview Enterprises, spilling its dark liquid across the shiny tile floor like a messy ink blot. The sound of a soft splash echoed, barely heard above the buzz of voices and footsteps. But as soon as it hit, the tension rose like steam from a simmering pot. Sarah, the department head, stood glaring at the janitor, a tired man named Robert who had been working there for years. He was hunched over, quietly gathering his supplies, poised to address the spilled coffee. But Sarah, with her hair pulled back and her power suit perfectly tailored, had a different agenda. She shrieked, voice cutting through the chatter like a sharp knife. The sudden change in atmosphere was palpable. Heads turned and conversations paused. Her anger was immediate, infectious, like a storm breaking fast. "This is unacceptable." Robert looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm just getting my mop, ma'am. I'll clean it right away," he replied softly, his voice gravelly from years of hard work but not lacking in dignity. But to Sarah, his response was nothing more than an excuse. She snapped, her words dripping with disdain. A prickly tension enveloped the room. Sarah had been known for her cutthroat ambition, her desire to climb the corporate ladder, leaving little room for compassion. But today felt different. Today was electric. The atmosphere crackled as others absorbed the scene unfolding before them. Ask Jason, a quiet intern who had been with the company for a few months, stepping hesitantly into the fray. He peeked around Sarah's rigid posture. "Stay out of this, Jason," Sarah snapped, shooting him a glare that silenced him instantly. She refocused her anger on Robert. "Is exactly why we can't have nice things. You've had more than enough time." The murmurs in the room shifted. Employees exchanged glances filled with concern for Robert, who was clearly used to this sort of treatment but still seemed caught off guard. A few heads shook in disbelief. No one liked seeing someone dehumanized. Robert stood his ground, his hands clutching the mop handle. "I'm sorry, but accidents happen." But Sarah's ire continued to ramp up as if fueled by an unseen force. Her voice rang out confident yet shrill, causing every breath to catch in knots across the room. But before Robert could respond, a tall figure emerged from the side officer Martin, the security chief. He was a solid presence, his uniform crisp and his expression calm, but his piercing eyes immediately detected the brewing storm. He asked, stepping forward, his tone authoritative but measured. "Nothing for you to worry about, officer," Sarah replied too quickly, attempting to sidestep the confrontation. With a steady gaze, Officer Martin turned to Robert. "Is that true?" "No, sir," Robert said, straightening up a bit. "I'm just getting my supplies." In that moment, tension filled the air again as Officer Martin surveyed the situation. Robert has been with this company for years. Sarah's composure wavered as the audience of onlookers began to lean in. "But he's not doing his job." "This is a workplace," she protested, feeling her confidence begin to erode as the crowd's silence spoke volumes. Officer Martin stepped closer to Sarah, lowering his voice. "Sometimes it's easy to forget that every job is valuable. This man might not wear a suit, but his work is just as important." Frustration bubbled within her. The pressure of the morning, the looming client meeting, everything collided in that moment, and her nerves threatened to burst. She snapped, sarcasm dripping from her words. "You're missing the point," Martin said steadily, refusing to back down. "This isn't just about the spill, it's about respect." The atmosphere shifted again, a wave of discontent flowing through the crowd. They weren't just spectators, they were becoming agents of change. "She's right, someone whispered from the back, emboldened by the tension. "Robert does a great job." The murmurs of agreement grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Sarah stiffened, feeling the ground beneath her shift. These were colleagues, people who usually followed her lead, now turning against her. "Let's all remember who helps us keep things running smoothly," Officer Martin added, a hint of disappointment in his voice aimed at Sarah. At that moment, the full impact of her words hit Sarah. She was the one who bowed to ambition at the expense of understanding. Her stomach twisted, the weight of realization pressing down hard. Robert, who had remained quiet and observant, finally spoke. "I know I'm not the most glamorous part of this job, but I take pride in it. I make sure this place is ready for visitors every day." The crowd fell silent, watching as Robert spoke with a quiet strength. In that well-articulated moment, he seemed to transform from the invisible janitor to the heart of the company. People nodded in agreement. They could feel the truth in his words. Sarah felt herself become flustered. "I didn't mean to undermine you, Robert. I was just stressed about today," she said, her voice wavering, a nervous crack creeping in. The response she received was not what she had expected. Robert's face softened slightly, but he didn't let her off the hook that easily. "Stress is part of the job for all of us, Sarah." Officer Martin allowed a small nod of approval, witnessing the bridge being built between them. For the first time, Sarah truly saw Robert not as a job title, but as a man dedicated to the work he did, day in and day out, sacrificing more than she understood to keep the building running smoothly. But he had become invisible to her, the man behind the mop overshadowed by her relentless ambition for perfection. "What you do matters, Robert," she continued, the words genuine. "And I was wrong to lash out at you like that." The crowd stirred, whispers of affirmation rising again. People could sense a shift, the tension lifting as compassion spread like sunlight breaking through clouds. Martin returned to the center of the discussion. He glanced between Robert and Sarah. Just then, a round of applause erupted from the small crowd. People broke out of their usual patterns and began clapping for Robert, who stood beaming as he took in their support. It was a celebration of humanity, of understanding. Robert smiled broadly, his demeanor changing entirely. "Thank you, everybody. I'm just doing what I've loved to do for years." That moment marked a transformation not just for Robert, but for Sarah too. The realization that every individual counts, that each role is vital in the grand machinery of their world. It sparked a flame of change in Sarah's heart, one she wouldn't soon forget. In the weeks that followed, their office culture transformed. Conversations turned warmer, laughter echoed aloud where there had once only been the tension of ambition. Recognition became routine, and it spread like wildfire. Sarah initiated weekly shout-outs during their meetings, not just for accomplishments on projects, but for sharing little stories about the people who made the workplace livable. She found herself talking to the custodial staff, getting to know their names, their stories. Jason noted one afternoon, in between meetings. "Robert has a whole story about how he started here and climbed through the ranks of custodial work despite all the challenges." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with appreciation. It was in these small moments that she found tremendous growth, not just within herself, but in the entire company atmosphere. Months later, as they planned for the annual company event, it became clear how much had changed. They even created a wall in the lobby where people could leave thank you notes for their peers, celebrating everyday achievements and acts of kindness. On the day of the event, employees gathered to celebrate the achievements of the past year. Sarah had planned an unannounced segment, wanting to honor Robert with a special recognition. As she stood up at the podium, her voice echoed through the charged room. "Today, we're not just celebrating our successes as a company." The applause was thunderous, feeling like a wave washing over Robert. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he accepted the appreciation, realizing that his work, once hidden in the shadows, had finally stepped into the light. In that moment, Sarah stood by his side, reflecting on how far they had both come. She didn't just see a janitor now, she saw a leader, a person who had found a way to uplift them all. As she watched him smile, surrounded by cheers, she couldn't help but realize just how much she had learned. Respect is a quiet power that can transform individuals, teams, and entire organizations. And sometimes that lesson comes roaring through the loudest of shouts. The morning sun filtered through the glass windows of Crestview Plaza, casting a warm glow on the busy lobby filled with bustling employees. But amidst the sea of polished shoes and crisp business attire, chaos erupted over a simple accident. A paper cup of coffee tipped over, spilling its dark contents all over the gleaming floor. In a matter of moments, the atmosphere shifted from the usual hum of conversation to a tense silence. At the center of it all stood Claire, the high-strung project manager known for her fierce ambition and unyielding standards. Her sharp voice cut through the room, commanding attention. She bellowed, her eyes narrowing as she glared at Carlos, the janitor who had rushed over to clean up the mess. He was a man in his 60s with tired eyes and a humble demeanor, always willing to help even if it took a little longer than expected. Claire snapped, hands on her hips, impatience radiating from her. Carlos looked up, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, but he simply nodded, a mop in one hand, the other reaching for a bucket. "I'm on it, Claire," but her words had already struck a nerve. The crowd of employees nearby shifted uneasily, sensing the tension thickening. They exchanged glances, the atmosphere charged with disbelief. Claire's tone felt unnecessarily harsh, almost cruel. The silence hung heavy like a cloud. Claire pressed, her voice rising again, a mix of anxiety and disdain. "Do you not see the mess?" The crowd watched with bated breath. Carlos's back stiffened. She had pushed him into a corner. "I'm just doing my job," he replied, his voice steady despite the sting of her words. But Claire wasn't listening. To her, the spill was a direct threat to her professional image, and her frustration boiled over. It wasn't just that the lobby had to look polished. It was about control, about maintaining facade in a high-stakes corporate environment. That's when Officer Reynolds, the imposing head of security, made his way into the lobby, his sharp uniform and serious demeanor demanding respect. He immediately sensed the tension in the air, the way anticipation hung like a thick fog. He asked, voice authoritative yet calm. "Nothing for you to worry about, officer," Claire shot back, determination coloring her tone. Officer Reynolds turned to the janitor, his expression shifting from concern to understanding. His gaze was rooted in respect, the kind that acknowledged the unsung heroes around them. Carlos looked back at him, maintaining his resolve. "I'm doing my best, sir," he replied, still holding the mop tightly. The crowd stirred as tension cracked the air like static. People had gathered in a loose semicircle, caught between the unfolding drama and their roles in the company. It was a scene no one expected, and the energy shifted, emotions rising as Claire's impatience morphed into defensiveness. Claire interjected again, though this time her voice wavered as the collective support for Carlos began to build. Officer Reynolds stepped closer, authoritative yet calm. We all have roles here, he said, scanning the crowd, who had begun to whisper amongst themselves. Carlos has been dedicated to keeping this place running efficiently. That was the turning point. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Yeah, he's right, someone in the back piped up, the words gaining solid ground. Carlos keeps the place clean. Claire's indignation flickered, a sense of disbelief washing over her. People she usually commanded respect from were siding with the janitor, and it began to feel like the walls were closing in. She shot back, desperation creeping into her tone. Claire, everyone has their place in this company, Reynolds replied gently but firmly. You're missing the bigger picture here. The contrast between Claire's rigidity and the crowd's growing empathy for Carlos was startling. A wave of understanding surged forward, moving through the lobby like an electric pulse. Then someone at the back, emboldened by the camaraderie sprouting around them, stepped forward. You know, Carlos stays late every night to make sure the place is spotless. The crowd murmured their approval, the atmosphere uplifting. Compassion began to fill the air where punishment had once ruled. Claire looked around, realizing the enormity of her miscalculation. She had underestimated the support everyone felt for one another. Carlos stood a little taller under the weight of the moment, feeling the tide turning in his favor. I know my role here and I take pride in it, his voice rang out, unwavering. Seeing the effect of his words on the crowd, he continued, we all have our moments of stress. For Claire, the realization hit hard, it shook her to her core. Up until that moment, she had seen Carlos as merely a piece of the workspace machinery, someone whose labor existed to merely facilitate her success. But now, she began to understand he was a human being, someone with dignity and a story worth recognizing. As Officer Reynolds moved slightly to the side, clearing a path for Claire to respond, the air shifted again. She realized this was an opportunity to forgive herself and in turn extend that to Carlos. With a shaky breath, she stepped forward, her voice wavering slightly as she spoke. I'm really sorry, Carlos, I didn't mean to speak to you that way. The crowd fell into an attentive silence, all eyes on her and Carlos. Carlos met her gaze and the tension slowly dissolved. It's all right, Claire, we all have our moments. A wave of realization washed over Claire as the warmth of understanding filled the room. She could feel something shifting within her, a desire to not just apologize, but to truly change. Thank you for what you do, it matters and I appreciate it, she said, sincerity flooding her words. The applause that erupted was spontaneous, a gathering of support and solidarity as colleagues resonated with the transformation unfolding before them. People began to cheer for Carlos, not just as a janitor, but as an invaluable part of their team. Officer Reynolds allowed himself a satisfied smile, watching as the connections reshaped the atmosphere in the lobby. Every role in this company is crucial, he declared, his voice steady and full of authority. We are all part of the same team. As the echoes of applause continued to resonate, Claire understood just how heavy that moment would weigh on her. She had crossed a threshold, recognizing that leadership required not just direction but compassion. Days turned into weeks, and the incident became more than just a slip on the lobby floor. It became a pivotal point for change within Crestview Plaza. Claire initiated weekly meetings to recognize employees' hard work, not just for achievements but also for their everyday contributions. Slowly, attitudes began to shift. The employees who once hustled by each other now stopped to exchange greetings, acknowledging one another. Carlos became a beloved figure within the office, his presence shining brightly as he engaged in conversations, telling stories of his life, their interactions filled with warmth and laughter. The culture transformed. Employees began treating one another with newfound respect, aware of the many layers woven through their daily interactions. They shared their stories, ideas, and even more importantly understood the significance of every role in shaping their community. And then there was an annual charity event, an occasion Claire had envisioned to invite the community into their organization. She had planned a special section to honor employees like Carlos, recognizing their indispensable roles which kept the company afloat. On the day of the event, as the crowd gathered in the lobby decorated brightly with flowers and vibrant decorations, Claire stepped onto the stage with intention. She took a glance around, spotting Carlos in the audience, a warm smile on his face that reassured her. Claire's voice carried through the air, enthusiasm shining through every word. As the crowd cheered, she looked directly at Carlos. The applause that erupted was thunderous, filling the room to the brim with appreciation and gratitude. Carlos beamed, smile wide and genuine, standing proud as he accepted the acknowledgement. In that instant, surrounded by colleagues who admired him, he felt truly seen for the first time, no longer just the janitor, but a valued part of their family. The moment struck everyone deeply. This was a workplace where empathy lived, where kindness thrived. As the celebration continued, Claire felt a surge of hope within her. From that day forward, she made it a point to not only recognize achievements, but encourage a culture of appreciation and respect. They all had a role to play in the ongoing story of Crestview Plaza: the janitor who mopped the floor, the intern who fetched coffee, and the executive who strategized for success. Weeks turned into months, and small gestures of kindness became habitual. It was as if the incident that started with a shout transformed into a symphony of compassion, reverberating its melody throughout the halls of the office. In a world often consumed by speed and ambition, they had built a community that thrived on respect for one another, a foundation rooted in understanding and empathy. And all it took was one moment, a shout that echoed through the air, setting in motion a chain of events that would forever change the landscape of Crestview Plaza. And as the sun set behind the city skyline, shining its last rays over the building, both Carlos and Claire knew the journey had just begun. Together, they were crafting a legacy that celebrated the strength of their community, one small act of recognition at a time. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind where the city buzzed with the energy of 1,000 ambitions. The sun streamed through the high glass walls of Silverstone Corporate Tower, illuminating the lobby where employees hurried past, buried in their thoughts and smartphones. But there, amid the rushing tide, chaos erupted when a paper cup filled with steaming coffee toppled over, spilling its contents across the pristine marble floor. The rich, dark liquid pooled before a startled janitor, an older gentleman named Frank. His weathered hands, worn from years of hard work, moved quickly, reaching for his mop, ready to tackle the mess. At that moment, the sharpness of impatience cut through the air like a knife. Jessica, the ambitious marketing director, stood with her arms crossed, perfectly manicured nails glinting in the light. She shouted, her voice echoing through the cavernous lobby. Heads turned, conversations faded, and all eyes were on her. She continued, her tone dripping with disdain. Frank paused, caught off guard. "I'm just getting my supplies," he replied, his voice barely rising above a whisper. But Jessica wasn't having it. "This isn't the first time, you're always slow," she shot back, frustration lacing her words. The crowd stared, mouths agape, unsure of how to react. There was a palpable tension in the air, a sharp contrast to the usual hustle of the morning. Frank straightened up slightly, his mop in hand, dignity etched on his face. "We all have our jobs," he said quietly. Jessica rolled her eyes, exuding impatience. "You call this quick?" And in that instant, a voice boomed from the doorway. Officer Daniels, the head of security, stepped in. Tall and sturdy, his uniform crisp, his presence demanded respect. He asked, brows furrowed, his eyes darting between Jessica and Frank. "Nothing for you to worry about," Jessica snapped, trying to regain control. But Officer Daniels locked eyes with Frank, subtleties of respect embedded in his gaze. He asked, his tone calm, steady. "No, sir, I'm just trying to do my job," Frank replied, his voice quaking slightly but projecting dignity. Jessica stepped forward, frustration evident. "Then why isn't it done already?" In that moment, the crowd shifted. Conversations fell silent as the tension cascaded, the energy in the room thickening. Officer Daniels took a step closer, exuding authority. "It's just a spill, Jessica. Frank has been working here for years." Jessica pressed, "We're a business." The tide of the crowd began to shift. They were witnessing an uncomfortable clash between authority and ambition, humility and pride, but also unseen until now, deep-rooted resentment. "He's right," someone finally whispered from the back. Murmurs of agreement fluttered through the crowd, growing louder and bolder, like a rolling storm gathering strength. Jessica's face contorted, a mixture of anger and disbelief. This was not how a workplace functioned. She was supposed to be in control. Officer Daniels wouldn't back down. "This isn't just about speed, Jessica. Frank's work keeps this building clean and safe." Frank stood silently, absorbing the shifting energy. He felt his heart pounding in his chest, caught in the wave of conflict that surrounded him. The once invisible man now felt the weight of scrutiny, and the eyes of his colleagues suddenly opened to his presence. Jessica shot back, panic now rising in her voice as doubt crept in. "Everyone here has deadlines," Frank finally said, voice steadying despite the turmoil. An unexpected shift filled the room, the collective awakening of a kind of understanding shared among them. Jessica felt that weight pressing in on her, the curtain of her determination pulling back to reveal a raw truth. She was laying into a man who worked tirelessly day in and day out, who had dignity woven into every thread of his uniform. She took a deep breath, caught between pride and shame. "I didn't mean to come across this way," she admitted, her voice lowering as she submitted to the moment. And then something remarkable happened. The crowd of employees began to clap, signaling support for Frank. Each clap echoed like a reassurance, a wave of unity rising toward a turning tide. Officer Daniels smiled as he witnessed the transformation. "Respect is what makes this building work," he said, his voice resonating with authority. With every passing moment, Jessica felt the collective focus shift. She moved closer to Frank, swallowing hard. "Thank you for everything you do, Frank." He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes, but warmth enveloping his features as he saw her sincerity. "Thank you, Jessica." And just like that, a bond forged in vulnerability emerged, a connection that neither had anticipated. The atmosphere grew lighter, the tension dissipating as laughter filled the air. Their shared humanity illuminated the path forward. As days turned into weeks, the shadow of that morning began to recede. The incident sparked a larger conversation within Silverstone Corporate Tower about respect and acknowledgement. Jessica fought hard to reshape her approach, not just at work, but in life. She made it a mission to engage with everyone, from the intern to the security guard, understanding their contributions and recognizing their worth. Frank became a treasured figure at the company, regularly sharing stories during lunch breaks, his humor and humility captivating his coworkers. "My job isn't glamorous, but it keeps laughter and cleanliness in the air," he'd joke, and everyone would chuckle, grateful for the shared moments. Desire to uplift one another seeped into the culture, and it was palpable. Employees began to acknowledge acts of kindness and hard work in meetings, applauding even the smallest contributions as people cultivated relationships fueled by empathy and respect. Even the usually stoic Officer Daniels joined in, exchanging friendly banter with coworkers and fostering camaraderie. "We're all in this together," he'd chime, creating a sense of security beyond just walls and locks. As the annual company gala approached, Jessica saw the perfect opportunity to recognize those who had turned the tides. She penned a heartfelt speech to honor Frank for his contributions, not only as a janitor but as an integral part of the family. On the day of the gala, the grand ballroom was decorated splendidly, shimmering lights dancing against the low hum of conversations. An air of excitement floated as colleagues mingled, the atmosphere brimming with energy. Jessica stood before the crowd, feeling the weight of her responsibility, her heart racing with anticipation. "Tonight, we celebrate not just our high achievements, but the countless contributions that keep us moving forward," she began, her voice steady, eyes scanning the audience. A round of applause erupted immediately, guests standing to cheer, voices harmonizing in gratitude. Frank, seated in the audience, looked utterly surprised as he stood up, his cheeks flushing with warmth. "Frank, your unwavering dedication ensures that our workplace is clean and welcoming," Jessica continued. "But more than that, your kindness and humility remind us to treat each other with respect." At that moment, Frank stood taller, pride blossoming in his chest, surrounded by cheers of appreciation. The essence of what had begun as conflict transformed into a heartwarming celebration. The room echoed with applause, the sounds and affirmation of unity. All had rallied to acknowledge the unwritten bonds they shared as colleagues, friends, and advocates of each other's contributions. Jessica stepped down from the podium, smiling at Frank as she met his eyes. In that instant, she realized how far they both had come from that fateful morning in the lobby. No longer were they simply employee and janitor, but allies in a mission to foster kindness and understanding. Over the years that followed, the culture continued to blossom in Silverstone Corporate Tower. It evolved into a workplace known for not just its efficiency, but its heart. Colleagues shared laughter, stories, and moments of celebration. The respect for each role deepened, creating an uplifting environment. And that robust foundation came from the ripples of one argument turned acknowledgement, where Jessica found strength in vulnerability, and Frank transformed from overlooked to indispensable. In the heart of those bustling hallways, gratitude thrived and respect reigned supreme. And through that journey, they both learned that it takes just a moment, one shout, one act of kindness to spark a profound change that lasts long beyond the initial tumult. And sometimes, it was the quiet strength of a janitor that could lead the charge, teaching everyone that respect is the foundation that unites us all. The lobby of Concord Technologies was alive with energy and purpose. It was a typical busy Wednesday morning, the hum of conversation blending with the sharp clicks of heels on polished floors. Employees hurried past the gleaming reception desk, fingers typing furiously on phones, minds racing with deadlines. But in the midst of it all, a commotion broke out. A paper cup, full to the brim with steaming coffee, rolled off a desk and spilled across the floor, dark liquid pooling on the marble like ink on a canvas. Tension filled the air, and all eyes turned to the lone janitor, Paul, who had just entered the lobby. His brown uniform was slightly rumpled, his face lined with years of hard work, but his posture remained dignified. As he rushed over to clean the spill, he didn't notice Jessica, the head of marketing, inching closer, her expression bubbling with impatience. She shouted, her voice slicing through the chatter like a knife. The sudden outburst stopped the busy flow of the lobby, and even the most engrossed employees looked up. Paul froze for a second, mop in hand, caught in the chaos of expectations. "I'm just getting my supplies," he replied, his voice low, a hint of calm beneath the tension. Right away, Jessica's eyes narrowed. Around them, conversations faded into a hushed anticipation. They all knew Jessica well, a hardworking, results-driven leader who often wore her ambition like armor. But at that moment, her sharp words dripped with condescension, and the crowd began to feel the gravity of her tone. Paul took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm doing my best, ma'am," he replied softly. The respect he usually commanded was slipping away like that very spill on the floor. Jessica snapped again, frustration boiling in her voice. It wasn't just about the coffee spill, it was about control, about looking good in front of their clients. Then suddenly, Officer Martinez, head of security, stepped into the lobby, a tall figure with a commanding presence. His uniform was crisp and his expression serious as he scanned the scene unfolding before him. He inquired, his authoritative tone ushering in a moment of clarity. "Nothing that concerns you, officer," Jessica replied, her irritation flaring. Martinez turned his gaze toward Paul, who stood there, mop in hand, the bustle of the lobby swirling like a storm around them. He asked calmly, as if trying to diffuse a tense situation with understanding. "Just dealing with a spill," Paul answered, the slight tremor in his voice faint but present. The crowd held its breath, anticipation thick in the air. Jessica rolled her eyes, her impatience palpable. "Not fast enough for this workplace, Paul. Maybe we need to remember that everyone has their job to do," Officer Martinez countered, a measured tone holding much weight. Anger flared in Jessica, but something shifted among the crowd. Employees began to exchange glances, murmured agreement rising in volume, branching out like a wave. "Yeah," someone said, emboldened by the atmosphere. The crowd's support washed over them like a tide, leaving Jessica feeling cornered. She demanded, disbelief flaring in her eyes. With a slight steadiness returning, Paul stepped forward, composure regained. "Jessica, I understand your stress, but we all have moments where we falter." Jessica felt the room shift, a tide turning against her. The voices of her colleagues formed a chorus of support for Paul, taking root in the shared atmosphere. "He's right," said another colleague. Officer Martinez nodded, feeling the surge. Respect is what makes this company thrive. And then slowly Jessica felt the walls she had constructed crumbling around her. Pride surrendered to recognition and vulnerability seeped through the cracks. "I am sorry, Paul," she said, her voice trembling. The crowd leaned in, catching the moment. The air shifted from one of confrontation to understanding, and the tension unfolded into something warmer. "Thank you for what you do," she continued, sincerity glimmering in her tone. The collective exhale that followed was thunderous, applause erupting from the crowd. Paul stood, surprised but grinning, a quiet joy lighting his features as he absorbed the appreciation flowing toward him. Officer Martinez stepped forward, his eyes glinting with approval. "See, we're all a part of one team, one family." Jessica looked around, bewildered but relieved, realizing how quickly the tide had turned. She had unleashed a tsunami of empathy, and within the chaos she had found strength in vulnerability and community. But tension lingered. The way the crowd buzzed with camaraderie held an undercurrent of suspense. Was this moment going to change their work culture permanently, or would it slip back into old habits and routines just as quickly? Over the next few days, the incident continued to echo. Employees approached Jessica to share their own experiences, moments when they felt overlooked or disrespected. It was a revelation. It became clear that the workplace needed a shift, a rebirth forged from understanding. Paul, nourished by gratitude, started to share anecdotes during breaks, his warmth breaking down barriers. He talked about how he loved making the office shine, but also about the struggles of being invisible. Those stories resonated, fostering deeper connections between coworkers who shared similar experiences but had never voiced them before. Jessica puzzled over how to mold this newfound awareness into something tangible. A new program, a monthly meeting. But while she plotted, another incident unfolded, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the next wave of change was more urgent than ever. Just as discussions about workplace respect began to blossom, a critical moment arrived in the lead-up to their biggest client meeting yet. The stakes were high, and pressure built across the office like steam in a pressure cooker. All hands were on deck. Everyone felt the palpable tension, especially Jessica, who was now leading the charge. With chaos around her, she fortified her resolve even more. She declared during a meeting, urging everyone to stay focused. But as the day approached, something unexpected happened. Tension morphed into anxiety, and the pleasant camaraderie that had begun to unfold now felt strained under the pressure of looming deadlines. Some employees reverted back to their old habits, becoming single-minded as they rushed past Paul without a second glance. The night before the meeting, Jessica's phone buzzed incessantly with messages, reminders pushing against her already tight schedule. Exhausted, she stayed late in the office, scrolling through spreadsheets, trying to calm the fluttering panic inside her. But as midnight approached, she finally understood how weary she was becoming. A sudden crash broke through her thoughts, pulling her from her daze. It was Paul, mopping diligently in the corner, tackling the remnants of office debris. Jessica's initial instinct was irritation, thinking it an inconvenience as she tried to finish her work. But then it dawned on her, things weren't okay either way. She had lost her way, letting stress cloud her judgment. As she gathered her courage, she chose to speak. Her voice trembled slightly at the break of silence. He looked up from his work, weary but attentive. "Sure," he replied, setting his mop aside and giving her his full attention. Taking in the warmth that had built between them, she continued, "It feels like everyone has forgotten the importance of teamwork. I don't want to return to what we were if this meeting goes well." Paul nodded slowly, his face thoughtful. Respect starts with everyone, not just in the lobby, but in the boardroom too. Inspired, Jessica made a bold decision. We need more than just recognition, we need a culture of support. Paul's eyes sparkled with a glimmer of hope. She exclaimed, igniting a spark within her. But before they could flesh out this idea, Jessica's phone buzzed again, a frantic message from her boss. The meeting was moved up to an earlier time, putting a weight of panic crashing down on her heart. "We need to be flawless," she said, her mind racing. The pressure was back, and she felt the crushing need to perform above all else. Paul sensed her anxiety, his heart aching for her, but also filled with the courage they'd built together. "Jessica, it's okay. You can only do your best. Don't forget to breathe." And just as Jessica prepared to respond, the door swung open, revealing Officer Martinez again, striding purposefully towards them and interrupting their moment. The concern on his face shifted the atmosphere instantly. He asked, taking in the tension. There was no easy answer, and as she glanced between them, Jessica felt a wave of determination crash over her. But as Officer Martinez opened his mouth to respond, Jessica could sense a dark storm on the horizon. Was their newfound unity strong enough to withstand the pressure of an impending crisis? In that moment, everything shifted again as the lights flickered, plunging the lobby into an eerie darkness. Nearby, the fire alarm began blaring and chaos erupted. Paul's eyes widened in shock, and Officer Martinez immediately took charge. "Everyone, stay calm." As Jessica's heart raced, she grappled with uncertainty. Was this the test they needed to solidify their bond, or the catalyst that would tear them apart? In the scramble that followed, could the community spirit they had begun to cultivate survive the storm that had just arrived? Or would the darkness dispersing their hard-earned unity reveal the cracks they thought had healed? With the lights flickering ominously, Jessica realized that the meeting meant more than just numbers and profit. It was a fight for the soul of their company, a pivotal moment that could lead them down a path of respect or further chaos. And as they rushed to evacuate, the air hummed with tension, leaving the audience hanging in suspense at the cliff's edge. Would they pull together in the face of adversity, or would the weight of their individual ambitions drown them in the chaos? The answer loomed overhead, ready to unfold.